Hi, everyone. So welcome to today's session on Investing 101. We will be sharing a lot of key information, including when to invest, tools you can use to invest, and the risks of investments. We'll also be talking about the different types of investments you can make. Just please note that this session is geared towards beginners that are trying to understand key basics of investing. And since we only have about an hour, we selected particular topics people mentioned would be of interest today. So I'll start off by introducing myself. My name is Tekla Kalinda. During the day, I work as a senior financial data analyst at Bank of Canada. I just want to say a little disclaimer that none of which I say or do during this session is representative of Bank of Canada. In terms of interest, I am passionate about teaching young people financial literacy, and I'm also currently working towards my master's in financial economics. I'm also a member of the Ottawa Global Shapers Hub, and I'm happy to be co-hosting this session with Danny today, who's also a fellow Hub member. Danny, I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourself.
Hey guys, thanks so much for coming, especially on a Sunday evening. My name is Danny Yo, and I'm currently an articling student at Jordan Highley LLP. As with Tekla, just a disclaimer, none of which I say or do during this presentation is representative of the firm. Now, this is my second year with the Global Shapers, and I'm very excited to be co-leading today's session with Tekla. Now, before we begin today, I'd like to give a brief introduction to our organization and our co-sponsor and partner, ZalaSmart. Now, the Global Shapers is a nonprofit organization created by the World Economic Forum, and our mission is to empower young individuals all around the world to play an active role in addressing local, regional, and global challenges. Now, at the Ottawa Hub, we are comprised of more than 40 members, and we're engaged in various projects that tackle issues in the Ottawa community, such as today's financial literacy project. Now, this series is also sponsored by ZalaSmart, founded by our very own Tekla. And ZalaSmart is an organization that teaches kids and teens the essential life skills of financial literacy through storytelling, experiential learning, and games. A very big thanks for partnering with us for this series. Now, all of you might wonder, why are we doing a financial literacy series right now? That's because November is Financial Literacy Month in Canada, and this year marks its 10th anniversary. Now, financial literacy is the ability to understand and effectively use various financial skills and tools, including personal financial management, budgeting, and investing. So far, for the past 3 weeks, we've held Financial Literacy Fundamentals 101, Budgeting 101, and today's session is called Investing 101, and we have another session on November 29th, 2 weeks from today, called What Are You Doing With Your Money? So stay tuned for that. Now, we began these series because currently we believe that there aren't many accessible platforms out there where we could really learn about finance and managing our money. Now, this is the first time the Ottawa Hub is opening this session for adults, as in the past, we did it only for children's ages 7 to 12. Personally speaking, during elementary and high school, I never got the chance to learn the fundamentals and basics of financial management. And it was only through the Global Shapers while preparing for the session last year that I was able to finally learn the importance of budgeting, investing, and other financial skills and concepts. I really hope that many of you here today will be able to take away important lessons during our presentation. And by the way, this presentation will be recorded for educational purposes only. And you can always request a link from us if you wish to watch this presentation again. This is the last point here. So we will have a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session at the end. So please ask your questions through our chat, either to everyone or to co-hosts. Now, Tekla, will you introduce us to our guest speaker and begin the series?
Yes, for sure. So it's a pleasure to introduce our special guest speaker, who is Jordan Highley. He is a content creator, a podcaster, and a financial educator. He graduated from the University of Ottawa and turned his passion from financial literacy into a coaching business that teaches clients how to self invest, and his passions for financial literacy also include coaching businesses that sorry, I meant self-direct. So in passive ETFs. So he helps spread financial awareness by offering ebooks. He also has courses and content with his financial literacy brand, Make More Capital, and his podcast, Highly Invested. What's also super sweet is that he'll be sharing his book that he authored called Grow in Money, his video course on ETF investing. He'll also be sharing his another book he authored called Create Your Own Passive Income Machine, and a budgeting tool that he created. So the fact that you guys all joined today, you guys get access to all of this material as well. So thank you so much, Jordan, for joining us. Next slide, please.
You're welcome. Thank you, Tekla, for the warm welcome, and Danny as well. Thank you for having me, everyone. My name is Jordan Highley, and I'm happy to be here with all of you tonight to share some of the knowledge that I've soaked up over the last 3 years. So many of you might be thinking, what drove me to become financially literate? And it was actually a bad experience with a financial advisor. So I want to just share some context, because I think it's anyone can have their own experience, and that will give them the drive to learn about their own money. So from 2014 to 2016, I saved $30,000 teaching English in South Korea. The main reason was because my employer paid for my rent, which was great. And I had a goal to travel. So I figured if I sent half my paycheck home every month and lived off the rest, then I'd be able to do that. So after the 2 years, I saved $30,000. And after my contract was up, I visited home after finishing my second year, and I decided to be responsible and invest so that I could grow my money. And I opened a tax-free savings account under the guidance of a financial advisor, and I invested $10,000 in active mutual funds. And this was before I left to go backpacking for a year on the other $20,000. And so in May 2017, I came home and found out that I owed Canada Revenue Agency $1,400 because I invested when I was a non-resident, because I wasn't actually living in the country and paying taxes. So this caught me off guard because the advisor did an assessment. So he knew the factors, that I made the money abroad, that I wasn't living or working in Canada, but he let me invest, which kind of meant the advisor didn't know the rules of the account he recommended. And so this was enough to send me down a rabbit hole of learning, and I've documented my personal evolution at Make More Capital and at Highly Invested as well online. So, next slide. Okay, sorry, my screen has changed. I can't see the slides anymore.
Yeah, we can't see as well.
Am I the only one having this issue? Okay.
Guys, please excuse that technical difficulty.
But yeah, well, I guess, does anyone have any questions about my intro story? Okay,
There we go.
okay, back it up. Okay, sorry about that, everyone. But yeah, so it was basically just, I had a bad experience, and I thought, well, if the professional, I can't trust him to look out for the best interest of my money or to make a mistake. It just gave me the drive to learn myself, and I can safely say that financial literacy has really made an impact and improved my life. So that's something I'm very proud of as well. So next slide. Other direction, please. Perfect. Okay. So what does financial literacy mean? Or sorry, yeah. So to me, financial literacy means understanding your numbers and not being afraid of them so that you can take control of your money. Now, many things in life we can't control, but our spending is one thing that we can. So by, evaluating it honestly, checking in once a month, it just gives you mental clarity and it helps you make less financial mistakes, which makes me such an advocate for financial literacy. Next slide, please. And so to invest, you first have to have money. So that requires saving. And willpower helps, or also you can use a tool like a budget. And this helps to just delay gratification in the moment so that you can, use that money for something, to invest for a goal, whatever you want to. Now, no one wakes up and shouts, I understand my numbers. It's a process. So like learning to drive, adulting, parenting, it just, if you practice self-awareness, you will pay attention and catch on over time. Just to give an example, this was touched in the other presentations, but one guideline is 20% saving, 50% going to your needs, 20% going to savings, 30% going to lifestyle. For example, I save to invest 30% of my income, and that's just something that works for me. So it does require understanding these numbers and then making your own adjustments as you go. So next slide, please. And I think ultimately with technology, it's never been easier than before to just save your money. And this is an easy concept called paying yourself first. So if you don't like the word saving, consider it, well, I'm paying myself first every month. This way that you keep a profit. So basically you set up automatic pay or direct deposit, auto transfer, whatever you want to call it, from your checking account into an emergency fund if you're saving, or into a tax-free investing account or a RRSP, whichever one you might have set up already. But so that every time you get paid, whoop, that money gets sent automatically and you never even have to think about it. And so that there's no wrong amount, but again, like 50 a month doesn't sound like a lot, but over a year, that's $600. Over 30 years, that's $18,000. $100 a month is $1,200 a year. Over 30 years is $3,600. Again, just example numbers. And of course, the younger you are, you can start with small amounts. And as you make more money over time, you can increase the amounts. But paying yourself first teaches you to live within your means. It gives you options and it helps you in case there's an emergency, you don't need to go into debt. You have some cash, so it's better than dipping into the negative. And next slide, please. And why should you invest? So to quote Warren Buffett, if you don't find a way to make money in your sleep, you will work until you die. And it's a very true quote, but as you know, the cost of living goes up and wages don't necessarily keep up. It's just very important to get whatever money you can working for you in order to build wealth over time and not stagnate and potentially lose money. But so why you'd want to? 3 reasons. Grow your wealth just for, not for you, but for your family, your future generations. Why not learn this? Why not learn or develop your understanding of business systems, markets, so that you can pass on this information? It's a great thing to start doing for many reasons. You can take advantage of compounding, compound interest. Compounding is the most powerful force in the universe. Once you start reinvesting interest that you make over time, it grows exponentially, as we'll see in the next slide. But the third reason is to protect yourself from inflation. Why is it called currency? Because like a river's current, money wants to flow. If it stays still over time, and more money gets printed, it loses its value. And that's what, if you don't have your money working for you, this is called inflation, where a coffee last year at Tim Hortons cost $1.80. This year it costs $2. And the price goes up because all around it becomes more expensive to produce, and that's what increases the prices. So if your money's not invested, you can be losing value in that way. So next slide. And if you're not familiar with Warren Buffett, he's a great role model. I've read a lot of books written by him and about him in the last few years, and it's just really investing is a bit of a mindset as well. But he started investing at 14 years old with $5,000. He became a millionaire at the age of 30, but he only became a billionaire at 56. So when you look at the big picture and you think about the fact that the average millionaire is actually 59 years old, one of the most important factors is just starting early. You can start small, but as long as you start early, invest often and reinvest dividends, time, which is your greatest factor, and chances are you are going to live for a very long time, is going to be an advantage and something that you should take advantage of. So next slide.
So a lot of people will ask themselves the question of when should they invest? And I think two big questions are, should you invest if you have a lot of debt? And do you only invest when you have a lot of savings? I'll start off by answering the first one. So they're both very good questions. And in terms of debt, it makes more sense to pay off your debt if your interest rate is extremely high. So for example, if you have a lot of credit card debt, that typically would range between 19 and 22%, right? Because that interest is so high, it would make more sense to pay that down first before investing. Another example is if you have debt, but your interest rate is really low, say you're investing and you're making about 7% interest on your investment. So it's growing at a healthy rate. But your debt is the interest rate on your debt, let's say it's a car loan, is only somewhere between like 2 or 3%. In that case, then it does make sense to invest because you're getting a higher return interest rate on your investment versus your debt. So you can kind of pay them down simultaneously. And the difference would be if you do 7 minus the 3, that 4% that you're still making in addition. So in that sense, it definitely makes sense to go ahead and invest. And do you invest if you only have a lot of savings? I would say no. I highly recommend to invest at any point or in time. You don't need a lot of savings to start investing. You could start small, whether you're investing $50 that month or $100, or if you're going larger to $1,000. At any point, I recommend to highly start first because as Jordan mentioned earlier with his slide on savings, investing also accumulates the same way. So if you're starting with just like $25 this month, $50 next month, $100 next month, over time that starts accumulating and you start taking advantage of compound interest. So don't feel like you need a lot of money to start investing. Start today. And if you have a lot of debt at a very high interest rate, definitely start paying that off first. If it's very low interest rate and your investments will create more interest for you than your debt, then do them simultaneously. Next slide.
Thank you, Tekla. And I think I might have said it before. I just want to reiterate it, but exactly the active saving, you want to make it a habit just so that it's something that you continue to do. If you can make it a habit and then automate it with the convenience of technology, never even have to think about it. And it makes it seamless and easy. And again, technology is a huge factor in investing these days, and it's made it more cost effective, more accessible, and easier with technology. So as an example, Wealthsimple is Canada's #1 robo-advisor. So this is a way you can invest using a fiduciary who's obligated to work in your best interest. Their tagline is "Get rich slow," and they advertise you can start with 50 or 100 a month. And of course, you want to use time. If you start at 20, you'll already be seeing great returns by the time you're 50, 30 years down the line. And so it just goes to show that knowing the tools you have at your disposal helps. And then if you actually wanted to reduce fees and learn how to self-direct invest and do this yourself. So this would mean finding an asset like this. This is an ETF, for example. It's called XUU. It is the iShares Core S&P US Total Market Index ETF. So an ETF is an exchange traded fund, but picture this as an asset that owns the entire US market. And you can buy ownership for just $32.84. That will get you 1 share of ownership. So the idea would be you could just have to start with 1 share a month for $35 or 2 shares a month for $75. And any money that doesn't get invested stays in your account. But let's say you have student loans and you've worked it out that when you take your income and your expenses, after that, you've got $300. And let's say your student loans cost you $230 every month and you want to pay your student loans off as fast as possible. So it's an increased amount. That other $70 could go to 2 shares a month. And that's just an example of how you can make a plan to pay off your debt while starting to invest. Most important thing though is to just have that plan, know where you're at so that you can actually tackle the debt down, because that's quite important. It's compounding in the other direction and you don't want to go too far in that direction. Next slide, please.
Jordan, we've heard that one of the biggest fears and barriers to investing is the risks that may arise while investing. Jordan, would you guide us through some of these risks and maybe tell us some of the steps we can take to mitigate these risks?
Of course. So the number one rule of money or number one rule of investing is don't lose money. And the second rule of investing, and these are Warren Buffett's words, actually not mine. The second rule is don't forget rule number one. But so basically the idea is, of course, the main risk is losing money. And if you don't know what you're investing in or you don't know what you're doing, you have a far greater chance of losing money. But that brings this explanation is that life is full of risks. And, among all of them, investing is one. But I do believe, and this is just from my past 2 years of experience, is that risk is relative to your knowledge and understanding of what you're investing in. So just as an example, the more I've educated myself on money, business, and markets and just done the research, I see far less risk now. And I see opportunity, an abundance of opportunity now that I've just developed my knowledge and understanding of these different industries and different systems and topics. So of course, I just think, if your whole life you never open up an investing book, well, it's not going to get you any closer to understanding the basics, right? So it's, important to try to use time when you can and know that there's always risk, but the more you know and understand, the better. But main thing is, there are individual stocks, individual stocks represent real companies. So you can find great companies to invest in, but if you do invest in a company, you don't know the first thing about it, that is 100% gambling. It's no different than going to get a lottery ticket or going to the casino. So that's important to consider. Even if it's a friend's tip or just, an advice from someone that, it's still, you might not feel great about it because you don't actually know what you're investing in. So new investors have the luxury of diversification by investing in what's called a diversified fund. Another term you'll probably hear is mutual fund, and we'll get into that a bit later, but this is an umbrella term that represents all types of different diversified funds. They will be active and they will be passive, but think of a fund as a basket that holds pieces of many companies inside, like, put some Apple in here, put some Microsoft, put some, Disney. And so by owning multiple, little bits of many companies, it really drastically does reduce your risk. Next slide, please. Now, if you've ever heard, or how many of you have heard of the S&P 500 index? If you watch any news stations, this will probably come down the bottom of the screen. The S&P has returned this today. The NASDAQ has returned this. So the S&P 500 index measures the performance of the top 500 companies in the United States. We have data back until 1872, but this is a common historical time period looked at, 1927, just before the Great Depression, to 2020. And so one thing to keep in mind, though, is you cannot invest directly in the index itself. It's impossible, as it's just a measurement of the size of companies over time, but you can invest in funds. So think of mutual funds or these diversified funds that are made to either beat the market or replicate and get the exact same results at the market. So that's when you hear people talking about funds. These are easy ways to invest or to get into a basket that's going to track, the top 500 companies or the best tech companies or the top healthcare companies, depending on what you're investing in. Now, if we look at the data, as you can see, when you put the emotions away and you look at the research, you see that there's 61 years of positive returns and only 29 years of negative returns. So just keep this in mind. The same people who tell you that investing is risky will be the same people that pay to have their money managed. But then, when the market starts to go down, they will panic sell for a big loss. And then they will dislike people with money because, they never took the time to understand how investing worked. And, just because you've sold once for a loss, it doesn't make you a loser. It means you lost, and you just want to take that as a lesson and consider how you can do better next time. So just an important point is that investing is 20% knowledge, 80% self-control, mostly self-control. So if you can balance your cash well enough, so even in tough times, you never have to sell your investments and stop the compounding. That's why even just 100 a month can make you wealthy if you start early. So, and one last thing, we're in a global pandemic right now, and I think it's tragic, it's sad, but it was a wake-up call that the best time to save money is when you have it. And paying yourself first, make sure that you can do that. And then, investing and keeping the long-term goal in mind is a way that you can build wealth in the background while enjoying your money in the present. Next slide, please. All right, and which diversified funds perform better? Well, we hear a lot about active and we hear about passive. So active funds are managed by professional managers who buy and sell parts of the fund daily to try and beat the market and get better returns. And passive funds instead are created at a point in time, and they are just set free to track a benchmark or group of companies in hopes of getting the same returns as the market. Passive funds are not actively traded throughout the day, which is why they are usually have lower fees. So they cost less over time, whereas active management, because they are you're paying for professional active management, the fees are typically higher. Now, if you Google Warren Buffett's $1 million bet, it's very interesting, but in 2008, Warren Buffett made a bet against a hedge fund, a company filled with active managers, that over the next 10 years, a passive fund tracking the S&P 500 would outperform the active managers. And if you read any investing books or do some research, it's not easy for anyone to beat the market over time. In fact, Warren Buffett's one of the few people that have done it. If it was easy, a lot of people would be doing it. And active managers can perform well in short periods of time, but usually over periods of 10, 20 years, it's not the case. And as you can see, from 2008 through to 2016, the index fund, the passive fund, returned 85.4%. So that's about 9% over that 8-year period versus the active funds. So next slide, please. What does this tell us? Well, when you look at more data over longer time periods, so again, when the whole idea of investing and starting small is that you play the long game, but that passive funds provide better returns according to the report. This is a report from JP Morgan presented by Wealthsimple. But because the markets typically trend up over time, you can consistently rely on them over long periods of time historically to perform better than active fund managers. That 7.2% is a big difference over 2.65%, especially if you're paying a fee that eats into these returns. So next, please.
Thanks for sharing, Jordan. I'm sure people are also curious to hear about the different types of investments. Can you share some, dive deeper into those, please?
Thank you. Yes, of course. Thank you. These are financial assets, and real estate is, of course, a common one. But for this presentation, we'll focus on financial instruments. Now, assets are things that rise in value over time. Liabilities are things that lose value over time. So, of course, if you want to build wealth, you want to put some of your money into assets. Now, stocks and bonds are common individual investments. Stocks invest in company ownership, whereas bonds actually invest in debt. And then, as I mentioned, there are many different types. We have active mutual funds. We have passive index funds. So active mutual funds would be where you invest and you give control to active managers to try and buy and sell and beat the market with your money. Whereas passive index funds are, you're giving your money to an asset management company who's putting them in a fund that they do not actively manage, which makes the fee much lower. And then lastly, we have exchange traded funds, which are very similar to mutual funds and index funds, but instead of having to buy them through a representative of an institution or through an asset management company, these are basically a similar concept, but ETFs, exchange traded funds, are found on stock exchanges. So you can just go directly to them and buy them yourself, which makes them extremely easy. And of course, same concept though, the active ETFs will trade more often inside, so they will come with a higher fee, where the passive ETFs are set to just track something. No movement happens inside. Ahmed, ETF stands for Exchange Traded Fund. So funds that trade on stock exchanges, basically. But so same rule as active will come with a higher fee. You're welcome. And passive will come with a lower fee. And then lastly, cryptocurrency. I wanted to add this in here because it's becoming quite popular. Now, of course, there's also precious metals like gold and silver. And I think cryptocurrency plays a similar role to gold and silver, whereas in times where markets are seeing downturns, and let's say the Federal Reserve is printing more money, as happened over the summer, people like to invest their money in gold or cryptocurrency as what's called a hedge, just kind of another place to put your money that's not in the market that you think will preserve your wealth as opposed to lose it. So these are all different things to put your money in. And just as an example, like I myself, I own stock, I own passive ETFs, I own cryptocurrency, I own a gold ETF, and then I also own a real estate investment trust. So many different types of assets once you get into it. And we will get in, I won't give too much time into the accounts because the resources that I offer talks a lot about the tax-free savings account. But I do think as well for any new investor, that the tax-free savings account is the best one to start with, especially if you're a younger investor and you just want to start, well, you want to build wealth tax-free. But we'll get into that on the next slide, please, Danny. Thank you. And so please take a picture of this if you must, because again, this is also featured in the Create Your Own Passive Income Machine, the PDF guide. But this is everything you need to know about the tax-free savings account. Essentially, it's the best kept secret in Canada. Now, many people will have heard of an RRSP, a Registered Retirement Savings Plan, and that is a great tax-friendly account as well. But the TFSA has some different benefits that, again, just help younger investors. So I would recommend, though, if your employer, so if you work for a company that matches your RRSP contributions, then take advantage of that because it's free money. You might as well. But until you're in a higher tax bracket, your priority should be to maximize the tax-free savings account. Because once you've contributed after-tax dollars into the TFSA, so this means money you've been paid by your job and then already taxed by the government, you can invest that money into assets within the TFSA, and any money that you make is 100% tax-free. And once you've made money, or if you've made money and you want to sell your investments, you can withdraw that 100% tax-free, whereas the RRSP has a penalty for early withdrawal. So it's the best financial tool for young Canadians, but think of it this way. If you invest your dollars in your bank account into a TFSA, and you put it in an ETF and you just let it grow over time, it's like planting a tree, watering it, and then you get 100% of what the tree turns into over time because you've planted after-tax dollars. That's 100% your money. In an RRSP, you don't pay tax on it now, which is the incentive, but when you withdraw from the RRSP at 71, you will have to pay tax on it in the future. So the same idea is like planting seeds, but in the future, you have to pay 4% tax every time you want to take out from, what that tree would turn into. So I know it's a kind of boring concept, but I try to make it as fun as possible. There are very good benefits to this account, so it's very worth developing your understanding of it. Thank you. Next slide. All right, and I think we've covered the basics just to help you understand when. So we know why we should invest, we know when, we know the risks and what type of investments get the best results long-term. So what now, how do we apply this? Step one is to choose the broker. So your broker is the middleman between you and the market, and it's what allows you to invest and gives you exposure. Questrade and Wealthsimple are #1 and 2 discount brokers and robo-advisors in Canada, and they were literally created to compete with big banks and to offer a more cost-effective alternative. So although people are hesitant with these online companies, I guarantee you, Questrade's been in business since 2000 or 1999 actually. Wealthsimple's quite new, but they're a very reputable company. So these are 2 trusted brokers that you can use. Now, step 2 is to choose the TFSA, and you have 2 options: managed, where someone else controls it for you and you just send the money in. This is hands off. And this is where Wealthsimple's robo-advisor is #1 in Canada. So if you don't want to worry about your money, Wealthsimple is a great way to go because in this day and age, the fees for robo-advisors are a lot cheaper, and we'll get into the fees next. But with self-direct, you can open a TFSA and control it yourself. Obviously requires more know-how, but that actually just reduces fees even more. And so once you've chosen the broker and the tax-free savings account, this is where you want to fund the account. You want to automate paying yourself first every month. So every time you get paid, the money moves into your tax-free savings account. And of course, if you're not ready to start investing yet, you can just build up an emergency fund. That's a great option to do as well. But then DCA, what I've put here is it stands for dollar cost averaging. And again, instead of investing $10,000 at once, you can break that big number down and invest 100 a month over time. That is what dollar cost averaging is. It's taking a big number and breaking it down into smaller number over time. And this is the concept of investing over the long run. But so you automate paying yourself first, and then you can dollar cost average from the tax-free savings account into an ETF. So this is kind of like a system that once you understand, it moves very, it flows very easily. So next slide, Danny. Now, this is what I want to compare though, because this is quite important. Unfortunately, if you don't have $500,000 or so in the bank, these are the common investing options we have in 2020, because to get real, professional portfolio management, you need to have a high net worth, unfortunately. So, for the average Canadian, we have the traditional financial advisor, which is the active management, but it charges 2.35% annually, which is arguably one of the most expensive management expense ratios in the whole world, very expensive. Now, the robo-advisor is a new kind of alternative option. The style of management is passive, and this fee ranges, but typically it's a 0.5% management fee from the advisor, the robo-advisor, plus the management expense ratio of the ETF that they invest in, or ETFs they invest in. While the third option, and again, these first two are to have your money managed for you hands-off. The third one is a little more hands-on. This is called self-direct investing. And this is where you would be in control and doing the investing yourself. So I just want to show you how the fee affects your investment over time. And this is why it's very important to pay attention to this annual fee as well. So next slide, please. So how does it affect your investment over time? So let's just use this as an example. Using a compound interest calculator, we can make some projections. And out of these 5 factors, you and I, we can control 4 of them. We can control how much we start investing with. So let's say we start with 1,000. We can control adding $400 a month. We can control keeping the money invested for 40 years. It's not easy, but you can control that. And then reinvesting dividends every time they're paid out so that the compounding starts picking up over time. And of course, it starts out small. It's actually only $193,000 over 40 years, far less than a mortgage in Canada. But if you can get a 7% return over that 40-year period, you will end up with over $1 million. Now, keep this number in mind, okay? $1 million, 54,129. This is before fees, okay? So just this would be investing with no fee attached at 7% return. So next slide, please. We're going to meet Kendall, Tom, and Sarah, our 3 friends. Each invests with that same strategy. They invest with 1,000, they add 400 a month. Each invests 193,000 over 40 years, except Kendall uses a financial advisor, Tom uses a robo-advisor, and Sarah uses self-direct invest. She cuts out all the management fees and just does it herself. She's taken the time to learn a little bit. So let's see how the fee affects their investment over time. Next slide, please. So with Kendall, mutual funds at 2.35%. That $1,000 with 400 a month over 40 years, dividends reinvested. Unfortunately, though, because the fee is 2.35, the average is no longer 7. The average is 7 subtracted by 2.35 every year. So although you know that you would stand to make over $1 million at 7%, unfortunately, when you subtract 2.35 every single year, you only end up with 561,000, which, hey, it's not bad. But when you consider the amount that you actually give up, 492,843, that, I'm happy to pay for if someone's going to grow my money for me, but, I don't want to pay that much. That seems a bit excessive when you consider the next option. So next slide, please. So again, just as the example, let's say the robo-advisor's fee is 0.5, and then the MER of the ETF that the advisor buys for you is 0.2%. So for this example, we'll use 0.7. Again, $1,000 at 400 added a month over 40 years, dividends reinvested, 7% subtracted by 0.7. Look how much more money Tom would keep simply by keeping that fee low. And again, 2.35 doesn't seem like a big number over time, but it adds up, especially if you're doing everything right and investing more and more every single month. So it just goes to show that with a much lower fee subtracted, you're going to end up with 868,980 roughly, but you only lose 185,000. That's much more reasonable for the returns you would get just out of and that's just the switch from the active fee to the passive fee. And lastly, the third option, please change the slide, Danny. Thank you. And if you go as far as to learning yourself, this is why the more you earn, the more you learn, the more you earn literally does apply to financial literacy. If you cut out all management fees and you invest directly in an ETF yourself, as you can see, 7 subtracted by 0.08 every single year, you still end up a millionaire and you only pay $23,236. So that is savings of over $500,000 just by putting in a bit of work, understanding the fees, and choosing the right asset over time. And you're probably wondering, well, is it hard to find an ETF that returns over 7% and has an MER of 0.08? Not when you're financially literate. Next slide, please. As an example, this is an ETF from the company Vanguard. Vanguard is probably the largest asset management company in the world. The founder, Jack Bogle, literally invented the index fund for retail investors like you and I in 1975. And again, if you want to have the basic understanding, you can find these ETFs. So just to run you through this one has an MER of 0.08. If you look at its past 5 years, since 2015 to 2019, it returned 20%, then 8%, then 13.6%, then 3% was one of the lower years. But if you take those 5 years and divide it by 5, that's an average of 14%. You'd be growing your money. Since this fund was created in 2012, it's actually been up at 17%. And then you also own these top 10 companies. So by buying this, you know that you own these. And again, this is an ETF again that also tracks the S&P 500, the index that we showed before. So main reason I want to show you this is because they are out there. They do exist. And having this understanding makes it easier to approach this and of course start. But why doesn't a financial advisor at an institution tell you about this? It's not their job. So that's why I think it's very important to show Canadians that they have other options that will save them a lot more money. And so my last slide, just because, financial advisors and I go way back and we've got such a wonderful relationship. I don't blame all advisors, not at all. I don't want to generalize. It's a structure that they work within that's more of an issue than the advisors itself. But it's important to keep in mind, this Money Sense article is a hidden gem. So get this about the financial services industry in Canada. A few years ago, the Canadian Securities Administrators, CSA, confirmed to SIPA, which is the Small Investor Protector Agency, that financial advisor in Canada is an unregulated business title that can be used by anyone. So when you consider this, they found that 96% of financial advisors spelled with an O, so ADVISOR in Canada, are dealing representatives, which is a salesperson without a requirement to look after your best interest. And again, that's the main thing. That term fiduciary is like attorney-client privilege. It's when the company should be the person you hire should be looking out for your best interest. Unfortunately, salespeople in Canada, financial advisors who sell institutions, mutual funds, are not required to look out for their clients. They're required to look out for their institution. So when you consider that only 4,000 real financial advisors with an E, ADVISERS, are real licensed fiduciaries with a financial background in Canada, this is very much worth knowing because, how many of you know someone that's become a financial advisor and they call you to have a coffee and get together and then, they end up pitching you? At least, in 2020, a financial or a robo-advisor does have a fiduciary obligation to work in your best interest. So, I'll let you make your own decision based on what you've seen. But, good thing is in 2020, investing is never been easier. And if you apply yourself, you can definitely produce better results. And anyways, that's it for me. So I want to thank you all for listening so much. I hope you got some value out of it. And I'm very active on Instagram, on TikTok. I have a YouTube channel as well. Just as someone that's learning as I go, I just want to be an example for people that want to improve their own financial situation and because, growing up, I never thought I would ever invest. It was way too risky for me. And the only reason I learned is because of that financial advisor. Had that never happened, it was the best mistake I ever made. It's that silver lining. So let me be an example, and ask me any questions you have. I'm happy to go back and forth. But again, I don't know everything, but I just know that, when I decided to believe in myself and start learning a bit more, I was surprised, and I have no plan on stopping. So yes,
Thank
Dina. Well, on that topic, my podcast actually, I don't want to plug just my podcast, but I will name out a few. So let me write these down. I don't actually listen to any financial podcasts, but there are a lot of books. The Common Sense Book of Investing is one. The Richest Man in Babylon is another one by George S. Clausen. Rich Dad, Poor Dad is another one. Now, I will plug my podcast though, because I do talk about investing. So Highly Invested. I do bring on entrepreneurs. Actually, Tekla was on the podcast for episode 18. And we talked about her journey as an entrepreneur, starting up her company. So the podcast is more about personal growth and entrepreneurship, but there will be episodes where I talk to people that do invest. And sorry, I should mention that this free guide here, Think and Grow Rich, is another great one. But there is, if you go to this link, bit.ly/guide-to-invest, this will take you to a website called teachable.com. Teachable is a platform that I use where I host the PDF, I host the course that I've made, the budget tool. So if you go to that URL, if you type it into your browser, you'll just have to make an account, and that will be your account to log in for free and access it. But you'll be able to go pull that PDF, the budget tool, and the free resources as well. And I recommend you go check that out because it's free and it is there. But podcasts, here, a few others. Stacking Benjamins is a good one I can think of. Oh, the Personal Finance Show with Bo Humphreys. That's a good one as well. So, and thank you, Emilio. I will read that right now. You're welcome, Dina. Thanks for the presentation. You're welcome, Emilio. You mentioned at the beginning that financial advisors may not warn you about. Right. Well, where did you find the responses to these questions? So for direct information about that, I would call CRA, Canada Revenue Agency. As much as it's not necessarily fun to have to dial in and be stuck on the phone, Canada Revenue Agency would be worth calling to try and get through to someone and ask those questions, because at least then you are directly speaking to CRA, who, and CRA is actually, they overlook the TFSA and the RSP, because these two special investing accounts, they are considered registered accounts. And because they're tax-friendly accounts, the CRA kind of overlooks them. So it's the CRA that allows you to open them. So if you have questions about those accounts, I do believe CRA would be the best. However, the other place you can go to is reddit.com. They have a very good subreddit called For Personal Finance. So just consider Googling Reddit Personal Finance, or probably Personal Finance Canada, and you can make an account, post in there your question. That could be another resource, because it's basically people who like to talk about these things and they'll just share their input. But I think calling CRA, be nice on the line. Obviously, there are people that deal with, people on the phone all day that they don't get to see. But I think as long as you stay calm and you ask the right questions, you should be able to get the answers that you're looking for. But just from what I know, I think if you have a social insurance number and you're living in Canada and you're over 18, you should be able to open a TFSA whether or not you are a Canadian citizen. So that's a bonus.
So Jordan, there's a couple questions that came directly my way that I want to ask on behalf of the audience. So one of them was, how do you know when to sell an investment?
That's a good point. So I think fundamentally, before you make any investment, you should have a plan before you get in. So why I recommend the diversified fund at the beginning for any new investor is because that's the safest place where you will likely see, where you will likely not lose your money. But it's important to think of an ETF as a long-term asset. These are not meant to buy one day and sell a week later. ETFs are meant to own over 10, 20, 30 years. And that's where the concept of paying yourself first over time and consistently doing that is going to just build that nest egg for you. Now, when you want to sell, that's where I would want to say is like, you don't want to start investing without a goal. And so the goal should usually be to prepare yourself long-term. Like this is my insurance for myself is I'm going to start investing so I have money. Now, if you have an inclination that, you know, a company might perform well for a period of time and you're going to see, you're expecting the stock price to rise, you know, before you even invest, you should not just jump in. You should at least have a plan and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to buy when the share price hits, you know, this price, because at this price, the company's valued at this many $1 million or $1 billion. And I mean, the idea of making a plan is knowing why you're getting in and having a reason or having some sort of inclination of why it is going to go up. So I would say once you've invested, if your plan doesn't work out and your plan backfires, you probably just want to sell and take the loss and treat it as a lesson. If it goes to plan and it gets to the point where you want to, like, let's say you buy in at 20 and it goes up to 40 and your plan was to sell at 40, sell at $40. That was your plan. That's a victory. Even if it goes up to 30, sell it. Like that's a win. But I just think fundamentally with the ETF long-term, the idea is to never, ever, ever sell, because if you sell, you stop that compounding cycle. Like Warren Buffett, the reason he's become worth $100 billion is because he's never, ever once sold his investments once he's bought them. And so that's where the whole point of, it's very important not to go into too much debt so that like the cash that you bring in on a monthly basis is able to cover your debt. So as long as you can balance your cash well enough so that you never have to sell your investment, that's kind of the underlying guideline you want to follow. But of course, if there's an emergency and you have access to it, sell it, take the cash out. You know, in the moment, some things you might need to take care of and you can always just start again. But ideally, it's just once you start, compounding is the most powerful force in the world. And if you never stop it, it will just keep rising. So if you don't have to sell once you've started, never sell. Unless you're really in a tough spot, then of course you got to do what you got to do. But yeah, so that's why I just think it's important to make sure that you keep your cash, or you keep an eye on that so that you don't have to dip into the other stuff.
Thank you, Jordan. Another question that came in was mentioning that you talked about the importance of knowing a company. And the question was, how much and what exactly do we need to know? What does it mean to know a company before investing?
That's a good point. Well, you want to understand how the business works. You want to understand what competitive advantage the company has over other companies and why, you know, you're choosing that company over others. You want to have a basic understanding of balance sheets, which is assets versus liabilities of companies. You know, if you have never invested before, I don't think anyone here should just technically buy into a company. But I think because I just want to share my experience, I started with individual stocks myself. And, you know, I made a bit of money. I didn't lose money. I lost value for a period of time, but like that was what kind of forced me to pay attention. And then the learning through books and reading is what got me to realize, okay, like the number one foundation should be the ETF. And once you've learned over time, you know, enough to understand what's in the ETF, you know, what, like how the dividend works, different things like that. It's just once you get more comfortable with the ETF, I think this is going to put you in a much better position to understand, you know, then what company can you get into? But here, another way to look at it is just try to think of companies you're interested in. I myself personally started learning about investing through cannabis companies because Canada legalized a plant that for some reason was deemed illegal for 80 years, you know, without a lot of evidence. And I just found it fascinating that Canada was the first country to decide to decriminalize. And that was one thing that made me interested in these businesses. And I'm like, well, you know, how do they create, or how do they grow their inventory? Then how do they distribute across the country? And again, for me, I think it was just, I always found that fascinating. And once it became legal, that was for what gave me the drive to keep paying attention. So, you know, if you want to invest in a company and you want to find the right one, think of like, do you like electric cars? Then consider watching YouTube videos about Tesla and Elon Musk and different industries like this. If you're a big fan of, you know, well, cars would just be another example. But if you're a big fan of like vegetarian, there's Good Food, there's Beyond Meat, there's all these different companies. I would just say start with something that like allows you to just learn more, because you want to have that like, just as you learn more about businesses and, you know, systems of business, different things like that, that will help you. And it's hard to say, but it's like, you know, once you know, you'd know, because you've put in the work and you've built up that understanding. Because otherwise, then it is just gambling. If you buy a company you don't know any, I've done it, and I've lost money. So it's just good to. I'm trying to put that mistake out there, or put that out there, so that you might not make the same mistake. But it comes with a whole lot more learning first. Another way you can do it, you can put $500 into an investment and then decide, because you've put money in, to learn about the investment. There are many different ways, but fundamentally just don't invest more than you can afford to lose at any point, because then that's not fun. That's life-changing in not a great way. So.
Thank you. Well, we only have a couple minutes left. So on that note, I think we will wrap up now. So Jordan, I want to thank you for joining us on today's session. There's lots of good feedback in the comments of people thanking you for the presentation. And there was even some private messages sent directly to us stating that it was very informative. So thank you so much for being a part of this. And for everyone else, I want to also thank you so much for joining us today. Our last session of this series will be on November 29th at 6 p.m. So if you haven't registered for that one yet, make sure to do so.
Thank you, everyone. You're welcome. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. That one is called Money Diaries, and it will be pretty cool. It's hosted by another fellow Shaper Media, and she'll have different special guests talking about exactly what they're doing with their money. I'm excited for this series because I know a lot of people are pretty curious of what exactly are people doing with their money? Like, what are you doing with your money? What are you doing with your money? So it'll be cool to hear directly from people, and not just learning information, but seeing concrete examples of how people are managing their dollars. So we'll see you then, and thanks again all for coming. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone. Hope you learned something.
Thanks so much, guys. Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Tekla, for having me. All right.
7.